Is Citizen Kane overrated? No, it isn't. Calling Citizen Kane overrated is completely overrated. The influence, the innovation within upon the medium is insurmountable. Few films we can take out of history and alter the timeline as significantly as this one. Whilst films after Citizen Kane may have influenced the course of VFX development, Star Wars, Terminator 2, or refocused Hollywood studios' attention to smaller, more charismatic productions focusing on writing rather than elaborate set pieces, The Silence of the Lambs, Pulp Fiction, it is fair to say that such changes would have happened eventually. It was only a matter of technology advancing or audiences gravitating toward different films after being inundated and unexcited by the prevailing mainstream cinematic status quo. Citizen Kane changed film language to what we know it as on this day. So Orson Welles was the sponsor, the patron of Greg Toland. If anyone is to be truly credited with Citizen Kane, it is not an irrelevant screenwriter, it is Toland, who Welles allowed to commit to every ambitious photographic creativity he could imagine. And Welles was up to the task. After all, he had little to no experience directing films. Toland had written to him asking to work with him. Welles obliged, and Toland enabled Welles' reputation as the greatest film director of all time. Actually, said screenwriter just stole Preston Sturges' script for 1933's The Power and the Glory. Welles' autobiographical component elevated an otherwise lazy affair from an over-discussed, fiscally opportunistic middleman. Welles would prove himself more than worthy of this greatest film director of all time claim with every subsequent directorial effort, in my opinion. I don't even consider Kane a major favourite of mine amongst his oeuvre, although its genius is still highly intimidating. Films before 1941 don't look like Citizen Kane. Even beyond 1941, it took a while for films in the United States, perhaps sooner in Europe or Japan, to catch up with the cinematographic fluidity and seamless genius of visual language enunciating a space, crafting a cohesive rhythmic style of editing. Even this film's editor, Robert Wise, rarely matched this vigour in a somewhat disappointing directorial output, 1951 accepted. Only until the American New Wave do mainstream Hollywood films begin to experiment with the medium itself. The go prior was to have the audience as unaware of a camera as possible. It's not to move. Toland's camera, animated and flexible, proved that not only could the camera move about and involve the audience still, it would not break immersion, but it could be more involving rather than a recorded, manicured to a perfection theatre production on screen. Kane was one of the first major Hollywood productions of the sound era, due to its structure, its emphasis on contrasting visuals, and the dichotomy of shots, to be totally unstageable, or at least would render any theatre rendition to be inherently inferior. Kane could have only existed as a film, and Welles, well versed in theatre, was more than excited, more than aware of what the medium could do which his initial home could not. He got into theatre by lying his way onto the Irish stage, so I read. Coupled with Toland's absurdly impressive photographic talent, The Citizen Kane would prove the most magnificent film ever made up to that time, many would claim, and then go as far as to claim that it was never topped. If Citizen Kane has one flaw, other than an unconvincing octopus prop for the newsreel Xanadu montage, it is a certain didactic American novel with a message obviousness which myself, as a non-American, find a bit unimaginative, though obviously well-meaning. Steinbeck, Fitzgerald, Salinger, even Hemingway, the metaphors are obvious, and every great American novel was trying to be the great American novel, to the point where in all the great American novels, in the traditional sense of what those were, are all a little bit absolute trite. I know they utilize the English language very beautifully, I know, but us non-Americans not drunk on self-canonizing, they just read as pious glorifications of the what is America question, and it is so self-important, honestly, in my frustrated opinion. What is America? A story which is told by those who gained fortune atop the suffering of many nameless and unrecorded. Where Kane does one better is it doesn't try to understand a country so much as a man, and then it does two better than those novels. By examining the man, it examines the pathos of these self-important, ignorant American icons. But Kane himself isn't a metaphor, even if something like Jay Gatsby is a metaphor for a certain generation. The sled is a material manifestation of what he enjoyed about this childhood. It isn't a symbol, it is a literal artifact. It is only a metaphor as a result, not by design. Even if it was designed as a conscious, hackneyed, formal metaphor, It is seamless, understandable, and organic within the film's established vision. It doesn't take one out of it, like a novel's extended passage illustrating the themes may overtly. So Citizen Kane not only proves theatre inadequate to tell its story, but literature also. The story of Citizen Kane is the story of an ancient emperor who cherishes his childhood toy, who believes, in spite of all his luxuries and power and influence, they were only happy then. It is a grim philosophic proposition, but as children, we observe our parents insist that we cherish our childhoods, we seem much more excited and optimistic than them, but is it easier to be happier when the world is smaller? There is less that can go wrong. I saw this film when I was 12, and maybe because I'd seen The Simpsons' Rosebud earlier, possibly its best episode, naturally, inevitably, at age 6 or 7 or so. Around that age I began viewing reruns of The Simpsons at 6 o'clock on Channel 10 AEST, but I totally felt moved and taken by the reveal of Rosebud at the end of the Citizen Kane film, and I'd been thoroughly enjoying it up to that point as well. You would be very surprised how many modern audiences would be engaged by Citizen Kane. There is no reason anyone's parent, co-worker, or significant other couldn't sit down with it and really enjoy it, get a lot out of it, unless they have a particularly snarky, smug, or sociopathic disposition, in my view. It is actually very modern, partly because it influenced cinema as we know it so very much. It is an extremely engaging narrative to the point where an audience might forget they are watching a film from 1941. As opposed to, say, The Maltese Falcon, Vertigo, even Psycho for some modern audiences, a silent film, a subtitled film, pretty much any classic western, or certainly most of them, an extended, elongated epic, lean or otherwise, maybe even Wizard of Oz, would be considered an absolute joke by some modern audiences, or very boring, old, or dated. Don't get me wrong, I do think there is something to be said for modern audiences, or audiences in general, anywhere, at any time, having an odd instinctive reaction against things considered old, out of an apparent joy for tearing things apart, especially being amongst a generation who are all or mostly computer literate by age 10. This was a vibe that they were meager or quaint or irrelevant compared to us. They can't even use computers. Seriously, subconsciously at least, we absolutely thought this about our elders, and it carries over to this day. If I'm a whistleblower, so be it, I guess. I would agree with perhaps an older audience, or just a measured, fairer, more considerate audience or viewer who might claim that, oh, modern audiences just cannot appreciate the art form. I would agree. I would be hesitant to ever claim the medium has gone downhill. I tend to also enjoy many or some current trends of mainstream cinema. I've enjoyed many blockbusters of the Star Wars or Marvel variety. Well, not many, but I like some of them, a small number of them. They've been discussed on the channel before. Some good modern kaiju stuff too, with Edwards or Wingard is involved. When Edwards or Wingard are involved, apparently. I just love the medium, old, modern. I find a lot to like where I look. Few older films prior to 1960, and certainly in black and white, can hold a modern audience's attention, seemingly. Maybe Casablanca as well, and maybe more so actually, arguably anyway. Also, Sunset Boulevard is an older film which I've known to captivate younger audiences, which is excellent. So what is even my criteria for a film? Many people just watch films passively, expecting them to improve their moods. Others have a more thoughtful approach, presumably free, or trying to be, from the biases of mood or human impatience. Others still believe that they have found the perfect formula and or system to read a film and chide anyone else for not adhering to a soulless checklist mentality for films to justify watching them without assessing them truly. I judge a film by how jealous I am of it. I am a filmmaker. I wasn't always a filmmaker. I was a film fan before, but one led to another. I would daydream of films which didn't exist before realizing that I was the only one who could make these films right. Some of my work is on therapy pictures, some video art and or James Benning homages. Some of my other features are not there for miscellaneous reasons. One had a co-director, one needs audio adjustments, etc. But otherwise, my time in that pursuit has been spent working on a feature titled Pandemonium since 2019, which is essentially finished. I'm just considering distribution options and ensuring I have licensing for certain media featured within the film, costs of which, unfortunately, for a 26-year-old pseudo-hippie film junkie, are quite steep and will ensure only a small distribution of the film, certainly for now anyway. I will share a webpage with the download link via this channel if anyone is interested, hopefully by May or so. So the fundamental question, why am I jealous of Citizen Kane? Kane places every frame within a track. Each weaves together the story of Kane's life as though one of Susan Alexander's jigsaw puzzles. rare, certainly in this sound era, this point in time, wherein a director could compose their film with every shot in mind, like a beautiful series of panels or storyboards. Yet Kane is this and more, with the most pronounced and involving understanding of space up to that point in cinema history. Few films are so carefully crafted. In the silent era, one only had to care about a series of images in between one's narrative delivered via text. Kane weaved dialogue into his images so magnificently. What could have been his inspiration? Apparently, John Ford. From silent era monumental dramatic episodes such as What Remains of, 1922's The Village Blacksmith, and 1926's The Iron Horse, Ford was possibly the most filmic of American directors, capturing motion and sequence like no other could within the Hollywood market. 1935's The Informer solidifies Ford as the artist whom could best transmit the data of consciousness to an audience at that time in history, a claim Goddard later gifted to Hitchcock for his 1956 feature The Wrong Man. In 1936, Ford's Stagecoach not only revived the American Western to the point where it is difficult for contemporary audiences to imagine that the genre was in a slump between the 1920s and until Stagecoach's 1939 release, but also formulated the modern standards for an American action film. It was the Mad Max Fury Road, or maybe just Mad Max 2 to ground it some more, of its day. The vision of fluid editing, charismatic motion, and involving spectacles with a degree of clarity and realization was superlative, unlike anything in motion picture history prior. Why not invite this approach to a biographical drama with a multi-layered, non-chronological screenplay and hire the finest cinematographer in the United States? Well, I don't know if Wells wouldn't necessarily have been aware of that, but certainly working on Citizen Kane, one would have become swiftly aware of that. For Orson Welles, this seemed like a wonderful idea. And history has been blessed for it. Citizen Kane is the film I can show to a modern audience in order to sell them on the idea that the film medium is one that I deemed worth obsessing over. When they realize I saw this film at 12 or 13, they can understand why I felt that there was no going back, nor did I want there to be.
There's two ways you can argue Citizen Kane is the greatest film of all time. At least it comes across to me that there has been two traditional means by which it has been argued as the greatest film of all. One, in a kind of hackneyed American sense, as though it's one of the great, obvious, and trite, and analyzable by a high schooler American novels, on screen, rather. It's like F. Scott Fitzgerald or some such. Or, you look at it as the most delicately and intricately composed American film up to that point in time, possibly film in the world up to that point, 1941. To the point wherein it was adored by all filmmakers, except perhaps one, I think. One filmmaker was not fond of this picture. Ingmar Bergman. I personally just suspect that Bergman was jealous, frankly. I love Bergman. I would go so far as to say that he directed some superior films to Citizen Kane even. Maybe not better. Maybe on par with some of Orson Welles' best films also. But I think he was just a bit jealous. To have read Citizen Kane's screenplay would still have been an indication that, wow, this script would only be truly effective as a film. It has rendered the novel, even in script form, already irrelevant as a medium. But you wouldn't necessarily suspect it would be the greatest film of all time. Possibly. It was certainly unstageable to be truly effective. It was certainly you couldn't convert it into a novel and have it be as realized and fluid and brilliant. And so it's ultimately the execution of Citizen Kane, as much as it is the inherent brilliance of the concept, which makes it, I think, a worthwhile candidate for so many having named it the greatest film of all time. Do I think it's the greatest film of all time? I'm not going to argue against people who claim it is the greatest film of all time. That's my take.